by Atticus saying that the tree's healthy. And so Jem is crying at the end, but he doesn't want Scout to know that he's crying because he realizes that it's possibly been Boo Radley.
Okay. So thank you for the summary. Moving on to the discussion questions. Let's just start from the very end because we closed the chapter with Jem crying. So thinking back to what makes him cry, what was Mr. Nathan's true motivation for closing the knothole, since we think he's lying about the tree dying? Do we think he was telling the truth when he said the tree was dying? What are we thinking?
I don't think he was telling the truth. I believe Atticus when he said that the tree was alive and healthy, and so I do think he has another motivation.
Okay. Then does anyone have any guesses about what his true motivation may have been?
I think that Mr. Nathan Radley really doesn't like people. We know that he doesn't have a job, he doesn't really have friends, so I think that he's trying to isolate himself and the people in the house from the kids, and he's trying to cut the lines of communication.
I think that would make the most sense, since we know Mr. Nathan Radley is, again, very strict, very religious, and so by cutting those lines of communication between the children and potentially Boo Radley, he's affecting both the children and Boo, his younger brother, and preventing his brother from kind of having freedom and from having fun. Any last thoughts on the subject? Okay. Then moving on to the next question, we're thinking, who might Jem think is leaving things in the knothole? I think we've already kind of gathered the opinion that it's Boo Radley, but what evidence supports our hypothesis then?
The evidence is, so when the kids came back and saw that they had some soap figurines of looking like the page boy haircut that Scout rocks, yeah, that it's catered specifically to them. And it's like another act of kindness, like Jem in his pants found on the Radley property too.
Right, so maybe, like, I feel like it's a little bit weird, but
Yeah.
I mean,
A little creepy,
a little
bit.
creepy, but perhaps he's not the most sociable person.
But I
Right.
think whoever's sending or was sending the presents, it was coming from like a nice place, like a place of wanting to create friendship. They were very thoughtful and, very thoughtful gifts that were given.
And I guess on a different side, some of them are also very valuable.
Yeah, yeah.
So the relationship clearly means something to the gift giver, who I think is Boo.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts? Okay. Why might Jem not want Scout to see that he's crying? Do any of you guys have older brothers or brothers in general?
I have a younger brother.
Oh, yeah.
I have an older brother. I feel like it was always like, don't let the little sister or don't let the sister know what's going on. So I like, in terms of this brother-sister relationship, it kind of matches my own life.
Yeah.
Like, seems about right.
And I think it was interesting earlier in the chapter when, as soon as they see that the knothole is filled with cement, Jem's first reaction is to kind of comfort Scout and say, like, don't cry, even though we don't really see evidence that she is crying. He kind of tries to let her know it's okay, things are going to be okay, we don't have to cry over this. So I think he's especially trying to hide it because he's already said that, and he might, as the older brother, feel a little bit prideful that he shouldn't be crying over a tree being filled up with cement, and might also be trying to protect Scout.
Yeah, as an older sibling, I can kind of understand it being easier to kind of just hide things rather than to explain the complex relationship between Nathan and Boo, and Nathan wanting to kind of keep Boo from connecting with the world.
Yeah.
I wonder too if it's a bit of Jem projecting his own feelings onto Scout, and he doesn't want Scout to cry, and he doesn't want to cry, and a result of that as well.
And also with pride, you know, when they played the game trying to pretend to be the Radleys, you know, he just did it because just to look like he's not afraid of them, that he's just brave and macho and everything. So just to do that, another thing, pride, not wanting to see her to see him crying, like, I'm big brother, I can.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like when he was
I'm
ready
brave
to go up to the Boo Radley house.
Right.
And touch the
Right,
door, and
right,
he didn't want to go
right.
back on that.
Right.
Last follow-up question then. Why might Jem be so upset that Boo Radley is no longer allowed to communicate with the children via the novel? Because when we open the novel, Jem is all very much convinced that Boo is a cat killer and a squirrel eater, and he drools and he's ugly, and all this kind of gossipy stuff, but now it seems like he's done a bit of a 180.
I think he realized that Boo really doesn't have a lot of people to talk to, and he realized that with this tree closing, with that communication ending, Boo really is pretty isolated.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could definitely like dig nice and deep into it, but I think also we have to remember that they are kids and they are living in the Great Depression. There's not a lot of money to go around, and I think it would be very exciting for them on their way to and from school, which is a place that they don't really, especially Scout, doesn't really love, to kind of have something to look forward to. Not that they were always expecting presents or that they expect people to give things to them, but I feel like it was adding some joy into their lives, being able to get these soap dolls, get the pocket watch, all these gum, which was very exciting for them as well. So I think we definitely can look deeper, but I do think that there's like, we have to remember they're young kids and like this exciting thing is like totally over for them now.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, it's both they're upset because this kind of like fun aspect of their life is now no longer there, but he's also upset because he's thinking of how Boo feels about everything. Okay.
Okay, so my job was text connector, so we're going to take a look at how what we've read here in chapter 7 can connect within the book and also to our own lives. So my first question is, thinking back to our overall theme, how does this chapter connect back to that theme of putting yourself in someone else's shoes? So you can kind of connect this within the novel, or if you have something to share from your own life, you can as well.
I think one example is Jem putting himself in Boo's shoes, and I think that's partly why he did get so upset at the end of the chapter.
And I think that kind of speaks to the difference between Scout's reaction and Jem's reaction, in that Jem is now at this point mature enough to put himself in someone else's shoes without prompting, but Scout isn't quite there yet, and so Scout doesn't have as severe and emotional as reaction as Jem did.
It definitely speaks on, that he's very empathetic, and just for him, like you said, just for him crying, getting upset, just to see how he feels, and the act of kindness of putting those things in the tree and just kind of like having that cut off, like no more.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of harsh in a way. So definitely empathy.
Nice. Next question. What does this chapter reveal about the children's communication methods? So kind of how are they communicating with other people within this chapter? And what do we have to say about that?
I'm just thinking, why don't these friends go up to the front door and knock?
Yeah.
So this is very much a childish method of communication.
Mhm.
And in some aspects I get it, and that it's secretive and it's fun, and that's probably why they're buying so much into it. But at a certain age, it's, you know, the normal thing to do is go talk to someone, which is what they're not doing. And at least it's a step forward in that they're like, oh, well, we should write a letter.
Yeah.
But still, the front door is, 3 doors down from them.
Right, right. And I think that also goes back to delivering the note with the fishing rod or the fishing pole. I feel like this is a step up from dangling a note like through somebody's window, because this seems to be a two-way communication, whereas a note through somebody's window on a fishing rod might not be two-way communication. This does seem like there is a give and take from whoever's putting the stuff into the tree and the kids at the end wanting to put something back in the tree as a thank you note or a letter. So it definitely reminded me about that, and that maybe they are growing up a little bit, and maybe the next step is to knock on the door. I don't know. Anything else? I think we're good. Okay. So how does communication change when you don't know who the sender or recipient is? Think about how this might connect to your interactions on social media. So sometimes you can send a message on private or be kind of anonymous online. How can that affect communication? Any examples from our own lives or things we've heard about?
So I think it's very, sometimes it's impersonal when you're just responding to things on social media, someone that's anonymous, you know of, but you don't really know personally. And some people are just very emboldened to say whatever that comes to mind, even though it may not be all the way appropriate, but you're just responding because it's not that face-to-face connection, and so because it's not that face-to-face connection, the communication is a little bit like lost, and something breaks along the way.
Yeah.
So.
Agreed.
I also think there's kind of an increased level of honesty a lot of times when the communication is anonymous. And so I think kind of going back to that idea of the kids still not being fully mature, like I do think their perception of Boo has changed a lot, but I still think there might be a little bit of fear in their communication with them, and that kind of anonymous interaction, I think, emboldens them, and that's why they're comfortable kind of like continuing to go back to the string.
Mm-hmm. Both of your comments kind of make me think also about the more negative side of anonymous comments. Because when we think in the novel, they don't really have a true anonymous type communication. We have a lot of gossip going on, but we can trace that gossip back to somebody, and we associate negative feelings to the gossiper. Whereas nowadays in social media, if you're completely anonymous, you can be honest, but sometimes that pushes too far, and now you're extremely negative and hurtful. But you don't have any sort of association with your comments, which can be, I think, in some cases dangerous.
Last question for me. When do you think that your communication skills started to develop? How would you rate your skills now? And you can think about online, text message, in-person, writing, even our discussion posts that sometimes we might do in class. How kind of would you rate those, and when do you think those skills start to develop?
For me, I became aware definitely in school of how I like to learn. You know, you have auditory learners, visual learners. Like, I learned that I like to be in class. I like someone there to show me what I need to do, instead of I'd rather do this than take an online course, to do something online that's a little more impersonal for me. So I'll just have to, it's better for me to understand that way and communicate that way. So, yeah, my skills, probably 5 out of 5. It's like, no, that's not true. 4 out of 5.
Kind of from a non-academic setting, thinking back to when I was a teenager, I know it was definitely a long process of developing and being able to kind of talk about your emotions and talk about your emotions with your friends versus with your parents. So I think kind of those steps of how communicative you are with different people takes a while. And even now, as an adult, I sometimes find myself saying, well, am I comfortable saying this to my parent? Am I comfortable saying this to my friend? So I think it's an ongoing process. Kind of thinking to all of the things that society has to offer now, like social media and texting and phone calling and all that good stuff, I would say I use it more to kind of assist my face-to-face communication. I'm more of an oldie in that aspect, and don't really rely on social media too much.
I like how fellow Miss King brought up kind of knowing the right situation, and that's something that definitely comes with age. Scout kind of just blurts things out, and if we think back to like her interaction with Miss Caroline, she doesn't realize kind of how her tone and the way she's saying things to Miss Caroline, who's an outsider, even though there are other kids in the class who can kind of understand what's happening, Scout's just like, well, I'm telling the truth. And I want to help Miss Caroline. So she's coming from like a good place, but she's not there yet with her level of communication. And I think that maybe as we go through the book, we'll see her kind of figuring out the right time and the right place, and the right tone for talking to different groups of people. And that's something that I've definitely, like, as a teenager, like when I went on college interviews, you kind of have to have a very specific way of speaking and talking, and that's different than your friends. So I definitely think that that's something that comes with age, and Scout's kind of just discovering that her mouth can get her in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of going back to what Ms. King said here, that face-to-face interaction and kind of communicating that way is definitely the best for me, especially as a teenager. Like, I did get like a lot of arguments with my friends over text messages because we misinterpreted, what each other meant. So kind of just having that as a supplement to that face-to-face interaction. I can kind of understand where Scout's coming from, thinking back to, like first, second grade, and kind of just not understanding when something is appropriate to say and when it's more appropriate to kind of just be a little more careful with your word choice.
Yeah. All right.
Want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to move on.
So I'm the language friend here. So on page 59 in the text, we have Jem waved my words away as if fanning gnats. So what does this diction say about how Jem views Scout's opinion? Communicate about how Jem views Scout's opinion.
Do you want to?
Oh, so saying like wave my words away. So when we just put that human action to words, kind of like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but kind of on to the left, on to the next. So I'm not really like hearing what you're saying, and especially gnats. Like when we have gnats, I'm thinking like gnats in my face. I don't like bugs. So like if I have gnat in my face, I'm like, get away. So kind of like she doesn't really view her opinion too well.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think it's the whole idea of fanning away gnats, fanning away bugs, like they're seen as bothersome and tiresome, and the idea that Jem is associating her words with something that is just annoying indicates to us that she's kind of over Scout's opinion right now.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So on page 62, on the days he carried the watch, Jem walked on eggs. So what does this indicate about how Jem feels about his grandfather's watch?
Ooh, so I could really picture this one in my head, like walking on eggshells, like trying to be really, really careful. I think that this shows how much Jem really cares about the watch, because when you have something that you're trying to be so careful with, you're gonna make sure